talking about one size fits all versus how can someone make it individualized, I was wondering your take on why a standard training plan may be a myth.
Yeah. So just from the perspective of, standard training plan being a myth, when I've worked with people, what I've learned is that you have to incorporate a lot of what we call today flexible periodization that fits the actual human, the actual individual that you're working with.
Mhm.
And everyone has a plan that they're going to go out and execute on for the marathon, let's say.
Yeah,
But let's say life happens and you can't hit certain workouts. The question is, what are you going to do to help that person get to the line and get them as ready as possible? And that's where individualization actually comes in. And even then, if you take a look at female physiology, there are some women that have no symptomology during their menstrual cycle. They can
hmm
handle standardized progressive loading. And then there's others where you actually have to accommodate the luteal phase and the menses, or one or the other. And so you restructure their training to accommodate that. That's
I
not
see.
a standard plan. Most plans just have a progressive build.
Yeah.
And so we're always trying to find the best training methods to allow us to impose a training stimulus on people.
Hey everyone, welcome to What Runs a Run Pod and to its special series on nutrition and coaching in 26.2. If you've ever wondered why some athletes crumble under pressure while others thrive, today's guest has the answer. She has been the secret weapon for the Olympic gold medalists, for professional teams, and even elite Marine Corps units. Joining us today is Dr. Krista Austin. From her time at the U.S. Olympic Committee to her recent leadership as the director of USA Shooting and her deep work in tactical human performance, Krista specialized in one thing and only one thing: making humans ready for anything. Today, we are bridging the gap between the elite military mindset and the everyday runner. Krista, welcome to the pod.
Thank you, Kamal. I'm excited to be here. This looks like a great series, let me tell you.
So, what did I miss to share your background? You have an extensive background. So, what did I miss?
You didn't miss a lot. I mean, essentially, years ago, it was very serendipitous. I became an intern with the United States Olympic Committee and was just fortunate enough that they kept me around, right? That I gained a lot of sets and reps, as I call it, and have just been fortunate to work in high performance sport. And that carried me really into working with elite military units, whether it was Marine Recon or the Special Forces. And then even, just reaching goals of serving as a director of high performance so that I can implement, more of the leadership aspects that I developed over the years. And really, you learn to have success under pressure, is what I would tell you that I've specialized in over the years, and doing what we used to call the science of winning. I think that terminology is coming back, but it's about teaching people to win for the goals that they set.
I
So
see.
that's really, the background. And we do nutrition, we do sleep, we do all kinds of things to make sure people are prepared to handle the stress they're going to put themselves under. So.
Thank you. Thank you for adding the additional context that I missed for sure. So, Krista, I've broken down our conversation into 4 blocks. And again, we can transition between different blocks as we feel that the conversation progress. But to lay it out, I call the foundation layer is the first one, which is kind of the ready state. I think which you specialize in. How do you make someone ready? Because you cannot build high performance if you're not ready to build on to start with, right? So that's kind of the foundation layer to start with. And then the second, we build the engine layer. Like it is more towards how do you feel for the long haul, which as a runner, if I'm running a marathon or ultra running, that is very important. How do you feel for the long haul? So that's kind of like building the engine, the second layer. And then the third layer, I call it the command center, which is kind of the between my ears, right? The brain and how do you manage the brain to get to the goal that you set to the finish line. And then the fourth layer, which I think we talked about, to make it, how do you make it individualized? So the concept that you say in these three layers, there are a lot of frameworks that are there that probably you lay out for the folks that based on their experience. But how do you make it work for a team of one? That would be the fourth layer. And then our rapid fire round, and then we'll wrap up our conversation. If that's okay with you, then let's start with the foundation layer.
Okay, so we want to start with what is readiness, right?
Correct.
And, readiness is an interesting concept. It depends really on what you're trying to look at in terms of what is someone ready for, right? In terms of running, especially like the marathon, we can take a look at all the training an athlete has done and said, how ready are they to go out on a certain pace, right? And how ready are they to fuel their body to go out
Mhm.
onto that pace? So we can look at some pretty physical markers, right? But when it comes down to it, ultimately on race day, it's going to be 90% mental for you, predominantly
I see.
because you have done all the physical work. And if you
Mhm.
have not prepared your body mentally to get into the race and do what you're supposed to do, I will just tell you that's when your readiness is not sufficient.
Right.
So readiness in marathon running often comes down to the physical component being 90% while you train. And then
Mhm.
on race day, it's 90% mental. We look at that as sets and reps, success in training. And then also, if you're a coach, you need to know the mentality of your athlete
Mhm.
and what are they going to need to control on race day in order to ensure that they are truly ready. Do they have all their food prepared for the night before, the day of? Have they practiced with the right fuel? And have they hit your list of known wickets for going out and executing on the race? Okay.
I see.
So it's very checklist orientated when we're looking at something like the marathon.
Mhm.
Conversely, when you look at other sports or maybe even the tactical space, readiness sometimes can't be well defined because there's so much that can actually occur that you've never seen before, that you can anticipate, that you have to actually be adaptable. And readiness comes down to your ability to adapt
I
rather
see.
than just hitting the wickets while you're out there. Does that track? If you're not adaptable in those environments, you're probably not truly ready to go into them.
I
So,
see.
at what point do you just say, "All right, everything I used to prepare for a talk I'm going to give, or a deployment in the case of a tactical personnel, or a basketball game when a coach puts together all of his plays
Yeah,
and the other team's running other plays." You're like,
that is
okay,
true.
this has got to go out the door. So you have to have ability just to adapt, and that is part of readiness in those settings. Marathon running is a lot more predictable. We need to adapt there, but you see more and more of that at the elite side or the professional side when
Mhm.
you don't know the readiness of the other competitors. We've seen that like when Mev's been in different Mev Kofleski's been in different races. You break down why he raced the way that he did. He had,
Mhm.
maybe 2:05 marathon if you ran it in a straight line, right, in this
Uh-huh.
system. But in order to win on the day, he had other factors that were contributing to his readiness, like his ability to sense another runner's initiative to take off
Mhm.
or to hold a certain pace for a prolonged period of time, or even his own ability to know that he can test the other runners. He can tell that they can't throw down a really hard mile like he did in the '09 marathon.
Mhm.
And he's like, okay, I'm going to do this to break the field open because he was that physically ready, right? In
I see.
other instances, he had another runner take off faster than world record pace. And he said, okay, I'm just going to try to go with this guy and see if I can handle
Yeah,
and
yeah.
sometimes training is there, sometimes it's not. You don't know how the tactics are gonna play out in a race like that, and you make a decision in the moment to see if you can handle what the other competitor is throwing at you. I think the beauty of, kind of not having to work at that elite level when you go to the marathon is that you can go and execute on your best strategy for the day.
Right.
And that's your best race. And that's what he, shifted to actually when he won Boston in 2014. He said, okay, I'm getting older. I'm going to get the best out of myself today. And the best race is like this. And that's what readiness is. You have to be ready for the other competitors or other tactics that you can throw at them and they throw at you at that level. But I'm personally glad I don't have to race at the elite level.
They were credited to get Mav Kofleski ready for the New York City win in 2009. I think you rebuild when people say he's too old to win a race like New York City Marathon. Now, if you have to take those foundational principles that you laid out, I know you probably have talked or been asked on this question again and again. So that I'll probably ask because this is very intriguing. At how do you actually take this principle and get someone, an elite athlete, ready when people think, hey, you may be too old to win the New York City Marathon or world class marathon like New York City?
Yeah, I think you see in training that certain facets like foot speed, tempo runs
Hmm.
are still there and
Sure.
the pieces can't come together. He was still healthy enough, but
Okay.
there were just certain pieces that needed to be rebuilt. Like he was relying on his TFL, tensor fascia lata, to actually run versus his glutes. So we know we can address that, right? He also has a mindset that has the patience to rebuild his body to where he needed to be. So when you know the athlete still has all the components, you say, hey, we might as well try it. It might take some time to get back from ground zero up to where he was capable. But when none of the facets of what it takes to do what he did are actually gone,
Hmm.
you've just got to put the pieces of the puzzle back together again
Hmm.
in the right way. And I think that's a lot of what I've been able to see over the years in world class athletes is how
I
do they
see.
put those pieces together and
Hmm.
how do you know when they are still truly capable and that something else is playing out so they can't continue their career. His was fine. We just needed to put him back together again. I said it's kind of like Humpty Dumpty fell off a wall, right? The
I see.
right. He had a great fall at one point, especially during Olympic trials. He had a significant injury to his hip, and that
I
probably
see.
caused a little bit of the dysfunction.
Hmm.
The other factor that came into play is that Dathan Ritzenheim was doing extremely well at that point in time,
I see.
and Meb was still competitive in nature. And
Hmm.
I remember being at the, nationals in 2009 for the 10K, and Dathan made the team. He didn't. He knew I was working with Dathan, and he just sat down with me afterwards and just said, "Hey, where am I going wrong here?" And I
Yeah.
said, "It's not that difficult. Your body's just not ready yet." Um,
Mm.
and so just talked him through. I said, "You have the pieces. Let's just put them
I
back
see.
together." He had been
Hmm.
rebuilding for quite a while, and you can't go from, a major hip injury like he went through all the way back up to 205 capabilities, even 207 capability in the marathon, unless you take the time to gradually rebuild all of those pieces. So he was on his way. He
I
just
see.
hadn't quite gotten there at the level that he anticipated. So it's partially about saying, okay, let's go hit the wickets.
I
Like
see.
you can still do this. It's just, someone had to believe in him a little bit, support as best possible. And really I was there like to watch his kiddo, his daughter at the time, Sarah. They had just had the second baby and he just needed support, right? So it's putting that support around them to make them resilient
I see.
enough
Hmm.
on the day to go do what they need to do. So he's always had immense talent. He's also
I see.
always been able to outperform workouts because his mental side is so phenomenal.
Mm.
So when you see that, you don't give up on the athlete. The question is, can you keep them tracking and keep all the distractors out of their way so that they can go execute again? Elite athletes get a lot of distractors, just so you know.
Sure.
And sometimes
The human. Yeah.
sometimes they're right. They end up with, distractors that makes it look like their career is finished. or causes them not to reach all of their goals. I've had that happen quite a bit. But in his case, once you sit down, you talk to him, you lay it out. That's the good thing, is that he is so different mentally, in my opinion. He really brings the East African aspects into the American distance running, and that's why it was successful. Their mentalities are very different.
I see. You use a term, he was running with TCL versus his glutes. So I'm curious, how do you identify that? And if I'm an everyday runner, how would I know?
Yeah. So the way we figured it out was to bring him to the Olympic Committee, where we had a thermal camera, and also the ability to do some EMG work. Okay, an EMG can help us detect the electrical activity of muscles, things of that nature. And we actually worked with Dr. Bill Sands, who was an expert in that area, to understand why he wasn't truly utilizing his glutes and his TFL. When we looked on a thermal camera, which uses
I see.
heat to show you hot spots in essence on their body, the TFL was just lit up. So they said, okay,
Ah,
this guy is so overworked. If we can decrease the work he needs to do and let him just re-engage his glutes, we should actually be okay, because he
mhm,
described the phenomenon as his legs were just shutting down.
I see.
So it did take specialized equipment to do it, but
Hmm.
very standard strength and conditioning, physical therapy, massage therapy, things of that nature, to allow him just to release the TFL, tensor
Yeah,
fascia
yeah,
lata,
yeah,
and utilize his glutes again to run. So that's really what we focused on. It just took time to rebuild it. They lose fitness,
I see.
and you have to rebuild the fitness they need to marathon at the level he's capable of. That can't happen overnight, because they'll get injured. So
Yeah,
he
yeah.
had enough downtime that he needed the time. So
We hear as a runner all the time that you need to strength training to strengthen your glute. So I'm just curious to your analogy with running with TFI versus glute. What is the performance outcome difference between these two that you see? That I know for elite it's probably very visible, but for any runner or any goal that someone is chasing for, what difference that if someone sees if they're running with TFI versus with glute?
yeah, you're gonna see probably a greater stride length in the athlete that is actually running with their glutes,
Hmm.
and an ability to progressively put more and more force into the ground and be able to sustain that force. When he
I
talked
see.
about it felt like his legs were shutting down, it just
Mm,
means he really couldn't maintain the force production. That's what was happening. So if you're a runner and you're like, man, I just can no longer maintain the force production that I used to, it may be that you've got, you know, I don't want to say glute dysfunction, but you're not truly running with your gluteals. You may be
right.
actually using other muscles to control the movement. And we see that oftentimes after injury or prolonged periods of time off, when we
Hmm.
just don't recondition the body properly. In his case, it
I
probably
see.
was the injury during the '08 marathon. That's probably my guess, and he just came back too fast, too soon.
Hmm.
Um, and he just probably sat there and said, "What the heck is going on?" Um, that's where that's a unique scenario, right?
That is true.
And
Yeah, yeah.
it just didn't make sense for him to be finished.
I see. I see. No, that's good. And kudos to you that identifying those areas to rebuild him up and get him ready for the 2009 that he won. So that's kudos. Obviously, I think I'm sure it was a team effort for sure. Um, Krista, you refer that the fitness and readiness for a race are not the same thing, right? I am fit doesn't mean that actually I'm ready for running a marathon or any long distance competition either at any level. How those things are different from your understanding, and if you have to give some kind of you use the word markers or and in terms of metrics, like okay, you are fit on these areas doesn't mean translate to readiness for this race? If you may want to have some metrics that you would like to share.
Yeah. So physical fitness is just like your work capacity, right? But
Sure.
if you're coaching someone, that work capacity only materializes on race day if they're prepared to utilize it by employing other areas of readiness to
I see.
succeed. So think about the nutrition component. If they have not actually trained their gut to handle the
Hmm.
fuel they need on race day, they're not ready to
Hmm.
race. They're fit, but they're not
I see.
ready. If they're
Hmm.
not prepared to employ their strategy to run their best on the day, they're not ready. Okay. If you're not prepared to figure it out when times get hard during the race, like maybe you need to slow down because something did go wrong,
I see.
and you're out there and you just let your body hit the wall, then
Hmm.
you're not ready to race. Oftentimes people let their bodies hit the wall, which I always find is interesting versus controlling
Yeah.
themselves on the day. I'm like, well, if it was that much of a headwind, why did you keep going at the pace you were anticipating? This is a unique condition. People who are ready to perform their best know how to modify and adapt underneath the conditions. Let's say it starts pouring rain in the race. How are you going
Yeah.
to adapt differently if there's slick roads or you're
Hmm.
soaked or you're getting cold, right?
Hmm.
Adaptability is someone, who's ready to actually race. I mean, Desiree Linden showed a great job of that when she won Boston. She truly adapted to her day.
That was
She didn't
2018,
even
right?
think she was,
Yeah.
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 I mean, she even said, hey, I'm not going to do well. I'm not going to
Hmm.
win this. I'm just going to go try to help other people. I don't feel good today. And
Hmm.
the entire race, you see her adapting to help others. And then all of a sudden realizing, oh my gosh, I'm in position to win this, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Dominantly because she was a gritty runner and the race
Hmm.
played to her favor. Whereas women who were not as ready to encounter those type of conditions couldn't win on the day. And they're that much faster than she is technically, right? So she was the most ready, believe it or not, for that race, but it just played out that way. The conditions were such that her readiness prevailed.
Right. Now, you talk about adaptability. Um, Again, the variables are probably not as much as someone in the tactical point of view. If you say someone is going to a combat or some U.S. military point of view, the variables may be one of the things that is prevalent nowadays. And I have another series that I'm doing on sustainability, which is kind of the unknown of weather, right? It can, I think the example you gave for this, and I ran 2018 Boston Marathon. I know exactly what you meant, the conditions that was not in favor for a lot of runners. It was drastic change. You have to adapt to it. Um, so how does someone can, I don't know, when you train, you cannot really train for all these variables. Like I train in Boston, so I can train for cold weather. But if I do go, say, run in London, I'm going to run next month. And if I'm expecting 80 weather, like I have not trained in that condition, right? I'm not gone to a tropical place to train myself. Someone else will have, but how do I adapt? And what would be your recommendation for folks who train or get ready to adapt?
Find out, do what elite athletes do, right? They find out as much as they can about where they're going,
Sure.
whether it's who they're racing against or the weather they're going to compete in,
Hmm.
and they build the strategy that they are capable of in that environment. So, like in your case, Boston, if it's cold and you're going to race in tropical weather, you can layer clothing, right? And you can run indoors on a treadmill. You can let the heat increase,
That
possibly
is
in that
true.
room.
Simulate, yeah.
Right. So you can run simulations to the best of your ability to create your body's adaptation in advance to
I
going
see.
into that environment. Okay.
Hmm.
In distance running, endurance events, that's very possible. Other times, adaptability is just your ability to respond because you have enough knowledge on how to respond. You've had sets and reps over the years, I call them, that teach you what to do underneath different circumstances. Okay. So sometimes I'm doing work in an environment where I'm like, this is not going to pan out. we've got to do something else here. And you just chuck your material and you use the knowledge you have to adapt to the people you're working with, to adapt to the material, just because otherwise you can't deliver maybe on your performance for the day. It comes down to experience. It comes down to being intentional.
Hmm.
And so whether you're flying to, give a talk and you have prepared for flight delays, or you're going
Yeah.
to go race, right? From Boston to a tropical weather, your ability to write out a plan and have a plan for adaptation and how you're going to handle things being different than you thought they were or going sideways is really up to you. The question is how many people actually do that,
Right.
because maybe they're not taught to do it. In high performance sport, we do that all the time. We develop high performance plans for every single elite athlete, ideally. And we take a look at what do we do if things go wrong? What's the
Hmm.
probability the weather changes, that different competitors show up, that maybe your drinks aren't there on the race course and somebody else took them,
Right.
you know?
Yeah.
Um, what's the potential for another competitor to race a certain way? So we look
Hmm.
at all the factors that could impact and develop the adaptability of the individual. That's the phenomenon of elite sport, is that we train adaptability.
I see. I see. Yeah, that is a good perspective if it can be translated back to, say, everyday runner. We may not have the team to support you to, you know, train you for those adaptability or the key areas, but you can simulate to the extent that you can get yourself ready how you want to adapt, or at least have a basic understanding of these are the potential variables I'm looking at, and what would I do? Kind of uh, causal analysis to see, what would I do if this kid happens? Yeah.
Right. Well, but I mean, think about traveling to a race, everything that can go wrong, right? If you're in San Diego and you have to travel to Boston to run the marathon, think about everything that could go wrong in getting to the Boston Marathon. I mean, you could have flight delays. You could have challenges with the food that's available to you as a function of flight delays. You could get out there on the course and have really bad weather, right? And maybe you did
Right.
not bring with you a rain jacket for that day, right? In 2018. Um, a variety of things can go wrong. Maybe you have a really stressful event just before you race.
Hmm.
The question is, what can you prepare for? And, that's really a coach and an athlete thinking through it. There's so much available to us online. We should be trying to think what could go wrong on race day, right? And
Yeah.
look at it
Yeah.
from that perspective. Seek out those answers. I'm going to tell you, no one ever gave me the what could go wrong scenario in life. It's more of an initiative that you take as an
Yeah.
individual to prepare for things to go to the go right to the best of your abilities. Sometimes there's factors you just can't control, so you're not going to execute perfectly, and you've got to accept why you did not and look back on it and say, can I live with that? Right? I've had that happen time and time again in life, but I'm like, you know what? I did the best I could on the day. And that's one thing I
Hmm.
learned from Meb. He said, I'm give it 100%. If my best isn't good enough on the day, then that's okay. I've learned to kind of look at it through that lens, because high performance sport, we always want the win. We want to do the medal. We want to hit our goal. But I've learned, you know what? You can't always do that. Like, go ahead and set goals, but if you don't hit them, know that
Hmm.
you gave your best, in the circumstance.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Now let's move to our second layer. I call the engine or the fueling for the long haul. Um, you focused on or you focus on efficiency over intensity, moving away from sugar high into a sustainable energy based fueling. Do you want to break it down? Like, what does it mean to just having the sugar high crash versus managing, um, your energy level throughout the race. I think you have a great take on how you have worked with some of the brands that you worked with in the past.
Yeah, so the way I look at it is that you have to have fuel at this level for most people, and you got to figure that out in training, right? What level of fuel do you need to hold on to a given pace? Okay, a lot of that comes down to energy expenditure and how much our bodies need to sustain life, right? We've got to account for that when we're racing. And then also, how much are we burning while we're out there? Okay, so I take it based off what's known as energy availability. How much energy do we need to have available to us in order to create this sustained fueling process?
Hmm.
Okay, so if your breakfast is not enough to cover down on what your body needs in the morning prior to starting the race. So think about Boston. You start what, 9, 10 a.m., something like that. If you woke up at 6, your body's already had 3 to 4 hours of functioning that you need to account for. So your breakfast has to be big enough to account for the calories it needs there and probably the calories it's not going to be able to consume while you're out there for the next, let's say, 4 hours, okay, for
Hmm.
running Boston.
Yeah.
If you can't give it a little bit of a surplus prior to going into the race, you're probably not going to be able to sustain the energy output because you're going to go, too much on empty. The gas tank only has so much in it. And the question is, how quickly are you going to expend the gas? You got to start with the gas tank totally full, right?
Hmm.
Before you go to the race. So many
Right.
people start without it being full. So there's no way you're going to have sustained energy. Then while you're out there, a lot of factors play into the energy that you can take in and the fuel level that you're going to sustain because some people have sensitive stomachs, right?
Hmm.
Some people don't do well with fluids, so they have to use chews or gels or things of that nature. Um, so the question is, how much can you take in so that you can
Right.
put out as much energy as possible? That intake and output has to be close enough to sustain a given work intensity, really. Um, so I try to tell people, look, you got to keep the fuel fluxing in at the same rate. You can't let it take the ups and downs because the
Hmm.
body isn't designed to operate that way. The engine on the vehicle operates best with a sustained level of fuel. And there's different types of fuels out there for runners in order to help them do that. So the question is what's going to work best for you on race day? I think every runner is going to come out of a marathon in some type of an energy deficit. But how can we get close enough to the energy you need for your performance to keep it a nice sustained level of energy output and blood glucose rather than the roller coaster that we see so many out there on? And they're like, well, I'll take one gel every 45 minutes. And I'm thinking, good luck with that because you're burning through, 2 to 3 times that every hour, right? If you're burning through 2 to 3 times of that every hour, you're not sustaining your energy. So it's
Hmm.
getting people to think about how do I keep the gas tank as close to full and stable and the gas fluxing in to the engine at a steady rate rather than letting it roller coaster throughout a race.
Makes sense. Krista, how does someone know what is their tank limit is to start with? And then as you start burning it out, what would be a one or two indicators that like, okay, this is the time to, I need to fuel up.
So when we look at the overall tank, it needs to be able to hold enough fuel, Kamal, to take care of our body outside of exercise, right? To keep us
Sure.
alive and well. And then we need to know how many calories we're going to burn on the day per mile at the pace we're running at and say, okay, if we're going to put our body into this much of a deficit, and I only have reserves for 2.5 hours, and my race is 4 hours, and I don't even want to go near bottoming out those reserves. All right.
Yeah.
You don't
Yeah.
want to run that risk. You're going to possibly hit the wall if you do that. Okay. How
Hmm.
much can I take in order to prevent myself from tapping into the body's reserves? And that's really what we have to understand. So I try to teach my athletes okay, by time I get to the race line, how many calories do I need to have in to take care of the body's resting needs by time I finish the race? Okay. So if my
Right.
body is going to burn 900 calories by time I'm finished with the race, if I can get 600 of those in, I've done
Hmm.
myself a huge favor, right? Now, if I'm going to burn 100 calories every mile and I am running, what, uh, 6 miles every hour, maybe that's fair
Hmm.
for most runners, right?
Right.
Then I may be burning 600 calories every hour. If the upper limit that I can handle is 300, I better get those 300 in because
Hmm.
you can't do it while you're out there on race day. Come on. You've got to
That is true.
practice this well in advance. And it's called training the gut. Okay. We have to train the gut to handle the fuel and the fluid it has to process on race day. So that's how I do it with
Hmm.
mine. If I'm like, okay, you're going to burn 100 calories an hour, how close can we get to that 100 calories an hour and meeting that demand? If we can get to even 50%, we're going to be that much better off than if you only take in like 15% every hour. So everyone's different, but most runners I could probably get about 300 calories an hour into.
That is so true. And I think you call it the test run protocol to figure out how much I actually burn per mile, or if you want to do a time, 1 hour, how much I'm burning based on whatever pace I'm running. That would be a good indicator to figure out what should be my starting tank, and then fuel, or fuel myself up on the race day or the day, to get ready. To If I'm running a 2 hour marathon versus 4 hour marathon, I should know how much I burn. It's a simple to me. It's a calculation that
Right.
load fuel
Yeah.
yourself up. You also talk about the metabolic efficiency concept, Krista, which is in a sense that how to practice. I think you call it, and I think there's a term called the low glycemic long run. Um, I'm just curious to see, you know, kind of sugar or kind of intake I fuel during the race itself. Um, and I have seen it's called the hitting the wall that you referred at mile 20. Like, how do I practice that I am taking the energy intake in a way that at mile 20 I'm not crashing, or it can be mile 21 or 22, which is happens for a lot of runners. So how do I practice for that during my regular training?
Right. So the recommendations we have out there for fueling training actually do this very, very well, Kamal. We have to abide by them so that our body learns to utilize fat as much as possible, regardless of exercise intensity, so that we don't hit the wall on race day. Okay. So if you take a look at the recommendations for training, not competition per se, but training, you'll see that if we're not training for more than an hour, we actually don't need to take anything in but water. So why is that? Well, it's because our body has enough glycogen stores to support us for 2.5 hours. So we shouldn't need it while we're training for 1 hour, regardless of the intensity. Okay. The only exception to that is if it's really high intensity intermittent activity, they'll say, have a little bit, small amounts of carbohydrate to stimulate the brain to decrease our rate of perceived effort and output more. But that might be something like 15 grams of carbohydrate diluted in a sports drink over the course of an hour. It's not going to meet our demands. It's just stimulating the brain. Okay.
I
We
see.
could also eat candy and do that if we wanted to. Um, but that's what's prescribed for that. We're going to actually turn our metabolism on full board when we go to do these intense sessions. And we're only taking those small amounts of carbohydrates in order to do like an interval session that's 6 by a mile. You don't need anything more. You're only out there for an hour, right? Like, let's say you're running 8-minute mile pace. For the
Hmm.
most part, the amount of work you're going to do then is 48 minutes of work. You're not supposed to take in fuel. Okay. Why do we say that? You're teaching the body to actually maximize the use of fat and its glycogen stores to support the effort. The body's being trained to draw on those stores and utilize them effectively for that kind of a duration of session. Now,
I
as we
see.
get past really 70 to 90 minutes, and we know we're going for that 2-hour run, we can start to put in about 30 to 60 grams of carbohydrate, depending on what our overall tolerance is to that gradual depletion of glycogen stores. And
I see.
sometimes for some people who get hungry out on the run, or maybe they can't eat a whole lot beforehand, we might go for 60 that second hour. But gradually, I try to tap it back so that they're down to that 30 for the second hour of the training run, so that on race day, when we decide to fully fuel the body, we truly enhance performance. Okay. If you take a look at any of the trials that were done in the research, they do one without, and then they do the one with it. And that's the
I
biggest
see.
thing about research is it's like, look, they're not chronically adapted to taking in carbohydrate. They're
Hmm.
actually giving them that on the day to see if it enhances performance. Okay. So that's something we have to understand is that when we're in training, if we give the body every single time as much carbohydrate as it will have on race day, that's not a good thing. We need to abide by the prescription that is out there for training in order to maximize metabolism so that we don't hit the wall on race day. And then we need to run race simulations where we practice what we do on race day. You can maximally fuel, a race pace session to make sure your gut can tolerate it, right? But we don't want to do that every single day. We want to take our daily training and use the guidelines that are out there in sport nutrition to actually fuel our bodies. And until we're in that second hour, and I really tell people 70 to 90 minutes, then you start with 30 to 60 grams of carbohydrate. And once you're past 2.5 hours, you can
Hmm.
go up to 90 grams of carbohydrate if you need to. You don't have to. The guidelines just say up to. And
Right.
typically I say, you know what? Why do you need that much? As the session
Hmm.
gets longer, I can understand that. The energy tank is depleting, right? And some people are like, yeah, Chris, I got a 6-hour marathon and my long runs build up to 4 hours. Okay, they
Yeah.
might need it as they get into that third and maybe fourth hour in order to complete the training session. But they're also going to need that on race day then. And how are you going to carry it with you? Okay. You've got to think about all those things as you go into your training. If you can't carry it with you on race day, here's what I would recommend to you for a 4-hour run. Slow down
Right.
and practice with what you're going to actually have access to on race day. Your body's not going to get given anymore, and there's no magic to race day. All right.
Right. Right.
So naturally, the guidelines in sport nutrition are designed to help us maximize the utilization, our efficiency of fuel. We just have to abide by them. But sometimes I
Makes
see
sense.
these athletes out there, whether it's a runner, a triathlete, what have you, and they're like pounding 3, 4 gels in a session. I'm like, why are you pounding gels? They have like a waffle before they start, and then they finish with maybe like a carbohydrate protein drink. And I'm like, what are you doing? Those are not the guidelines.
Yeah.
And when they go off-roading like that, I'm like, "Okay, where are they getting this?" But I think they just get confused between fueling for race day and fueling and training, really.
Krista, what happens when you hit the wall to our body, to your understanding?
Few things. It could be that we have depleted our glycogen stores, okay, and we didn't train to fuel properly. So we may hit the wall as a function of that. Okay, so that's more of a physical aspect.
Sure. Sure.
Another reason might be because we are expending energy, our physical effort on the day
Hmm.
is higher than anything we've trained for, right? And then
Right.
there's the mental component where some people mentally cannot handle the course itself or the fact that you train up through 20 miles like you're going to do, but the race is actually 26.2 and they've never
Right.
done any type of over distance training.
Hmm.
And so there's multiple factors that can occur when we actually hit the wall.
Hmm.
Tim Noakes wrote a book called The Lore of Running, where he talks about the governor. Okay. And he says the governor does exist. And that's where the brain becomes so depleted during prolonged racing that we can actually hit the wall because the brain's not prepared to actually take that level of stressor on. Okay. That's that mental side where if people are not trained to push past 20 miles, um,
Yeah.
they might actually hit the wall mentally because they're only used to going 20 miles, or they see a false summit, or they're not used to how a course is designed, right? Where all of a sudden there's a tough hill, all right? And you've got to push up hills on the last 10K of Boston's course, right? There's a component of that is
Yeah.
hilly. And
Yeah.
people are like, "Oh, this hurts so bad," right? And we always love running into the finish in Boston, but there's something that comes before that. And everybody just wants
Right.
to run into the finish, right?
Yep. Yep. Yep.
um, and if we're not prepared to do that, and there's different ways to prep people to do it, then we're gonna have an issue. Sometimes, if you're like, "Hey, I can only do 20 miles," I'll say, "Okay, let's gradually make the last 10K of that 20 miles intensity work. So you learn to work harder than your marathon pace for the last 10K." Something like that will
Mhm.
actually prepare you to, handle, Boston's course for the last 10K. So we have to do things at the really elite level. They'll run 28 miles, up at altitude at 5:30 pace. You're like, "Meb, what are you doing?" Well, he's getting ready to handle Boston, right? If they're doing things like that in training as their third workout of the week, when they are running 120 to 140 miles a week,
Mhm.
that's what's going to give them the resiliency to handle the last 10K of Boston's course. But they're used to putting their body through it. They don't just train 20 miles. They have a few sessions where they push well past 20 miles.
So they're well trained, not like an average runner who probably will do 20 or 22 miles, and then they say the heart will take you to the finish line, and I have a hope that that takes you really to the finish line. So that would be a good. Sorry, go ahead, Krista. Do you want to say something about?
No, 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 no. Go ahead.
No, so I was saying it will be a good transition to our third segment, to the command center. I think you brought up hitting the wall is not only from a fueling point of view, it's also from a mental point of view. It's also um, so you worked with the USA shooting where precision is everything, right? And running, I think precision fails when you get tired, which I think you mentioned, hitting the wall. We pretty much stops when our brain tells us to stop. Usually what happens. Your brain gets tired before actually your legs are, or the body gets tired. Um, what would be a brain fuel? I know we talked about fueling for the energy, but what is the brain fuel that a runner should be training about to get ready for hitting the wall?
Oh, brain fuel. So, fuel for the brain might be something like a ketone ester. I think you might have seen these out on the market. Ketone esters actually will supersede glucose, carbohydrate metabolism in the brain, and they can actually go in and modify the fuel source that the brain utilizes. We haven't done a ton of research to understand how well they can work in runners to supersede carbohydrate, but it is something that you can look at as an actual source of brain fuel. The other source might be not a fuel source, but caffeine. Okay. Caffeine can go in and stimulate different areas of the brain to help keep you focused and going. Okay. You have to take a look at how is your brain working. Someone like Meb, he didn't need the caffeine and he didn't need the ketone esters, right? Because he already was of a certain mentality with the marathon and the
Sure.
training side that, he's just going to get through it. That's innate, right? But if we have to teach people to have brain fuel, either one, we've got to give them something that keeps their brain going, or two, we have to train them not to stop, right? A lot of people will actually stop in training when they just feel like they can't focus anymore. And the
Hmm.
question is, how are we going to get you to focus and just keep pushing when physically you're not actually tired? Ironman athletes do this all the time, where they've got to learn just to go an ultra distance. Ultra runners do it, but they're teaching their body not to stop. And sometimes you do things like, okay, I'm going to put myself out on a course where I cannot turn around, and get back to my car until I have put all the mileage in. So let's say you're kind of known mentally for hitting the wall at 20 miles. Okay.
Huh.
So what are you going to do? You might put yourself out on a course that's 12 miles out and 12 miles back, right?
Yeah.
To your
Yeah.
car. You're not allowed to stop because guess what? You're not going to get back to the car now, are you?
Right.
You're going to learn to
Get to
keep
come back.
going because you've got to
Mhm.
get back to the car.
I see.
Little things like that can teach us about how to handle hitting the wall. And the question is, mentally in those processes, did you stop and just start to walk? And why did you start to walk? Were you actually tired? Did your legs give out?
Mhm.
We have to dig into those things to know why you stopped running and just started walking.
Right.
Why did it happen? You know you have to get back to the car, right?
That is true. Yeah.
Asking people, right? Asking people to tell you what's on inside their heads, even in a simple scenario like that, where we have to achieve it, is where coaching actually comes in, Kamal, to understand what causes people mentally
Mhm.
to hit that wall. Are they just kind of going nuts because they're out there and they just can't focus any longer?
Right.
That might
Right.
be it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've had those clients
Huh.
where they just mentally cannot focus long enough. Others, it's just like, hey, I didn't really want to do this. Most marathon runners I've come across that choose to run New York, Boston, different races like this, they've got other things that are going to keep them going to the finish line. So let's take a look at a 6-hour marathon runner. I'm like, what keeps them going for 6 hours on New York's course? Well, it's
Yeah.
because they've put their friends around them and they're doing it together. And that's the only thing that's keeping them going while they're out there is that they've got friends to do it with. And they've got this goal that they're going to do this together. That is what actually pushes them through the marathon, no matter how glycogen depleted they are, how little energy they consume, how much of a run walk they've got to make it. So there's a
Mhm.
lot of different things we can use to actually get us to push through something. The question is, what do you need in order to do it?
I see. So you need to come up with a strategic approach. Whatever the goal is, it's a running a 2 hour or a 4 hour or a 6 hour marathon. What would take you to the finish line, irrespective of physical, the throughput that you'll go through that day. That's what I think you're suggesting.
Right.
Um,
Yeah. I mean, you just have to decide that you're going to finish it. And I've worked with
yeah,
clients that say, Krista, I just need to finish it. How am I going to finish a half marathon, a marathon? Okay. I've had the client that said, I just want to be able to actually run a mile. I can walk a mile now. I just want to be able to truly run the entire mile
right, right.
I- and not stop.
Yeah, Krista, I'm curious about the scenario because I consider I'm running. I'm from tech, so I take data as an input, like to adapt and improve. So I'll give you this example. So I was running New York City Marathon last November, right? November 2nd. So again, my goal was around little over 4 hours marathon. And when I was crossing the Bronx, I don't know if you have seen the crowd in Bronx after you come out of the Verrazano Bridge. It's wild. It's loud. And I never trained. I knew that the New York crowd is super supportive, but I didn't know that loud. So it made me in a discomfort. So what I did was I pushed myself to go faster so that I can go through that stretch fast. And in the process, I think it was not in my training. I usually not go probably a minute or two faster than I would run a mile. I was so because I saw my watch, it was 170. I was like, I never run 170 heart rate. So I need to cool it down. So I need to pass through this fast so that I can reduce my heart rate to go to my regular pace. And in the process, mile 16, I got the cramps, and it never left me till mile 20. I crossed the finish line. How do you avoid? This is a decision between my years that took based on the data I saw on the race day, which was dumb, literally. How do you recommend someone to not make this kind of dumb decisions on the race day? I think it's coming back to our first step is kind of how do you adapt? And I don't know if I can simulate this kind of scenario when I'm training.
Yeah. Well, I think, you learn by doing, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
that's the biggest thing, Kamal, is that obviously no one had warned you about what happened, what was going to
right,
happen, right?
right, right,
And they didn't say, Kamal, this is how you usually train. Do we need to prepare you to experience this within the environment, right? Typically in high performance sport, we will use things that prepare athletes for that. So if we were going into the 2008 games, we had a sport where, you know, a, you know, our athletes weren't the favorite athletes in that country to win. We knew they had a high potential to win to create Olympic history. And we actually took sound, right, that they might hear during that competition and put it on in training, from being booed to loud noises, just different things like that, to actually prepare them mentally to have to compete and to actually compartmentalize. That's what needed to be done for you because you're not used to training that way. And you're the person that does not gain energy out of being in that crowd, right? There's some people that will intentionally slow down in a section
right,
like that. And they're
right,
like,
right.
all right, we're with the crowd, they're really enjoying it. And there's someone
Yeah,
like you that decides to take on. We have
yeah,
to prepare you because you don't care for it. There's other people that are taking some recovery time as they go through that section, right? They're like, sweet, I'm going to do a recovery mile or something, right?
yeah,
And they're
yeah.
just going to enjoy it. So it comes back to preparation. And then in the adaptability, now that you've learned this about yourself, for the next race, you need to just tell yourself, you're not allowed to do this. Okay. Like, this about yourself now. You paid the price once. It's kind of like Meb's first New York City marathon. He
Hmm.
knew it was going to be cold, and he had a beanie. He had like the sleeves and everything. And it's like you told him that it was going to be cold. Went through this with Dathan too, when he ran New York one time. And you're like, hey, don't take it off. It's cold.
Yeah,
They
yeah.
take it off anyway. And these are professional runners. They've been told not to take off the very clothing that's going to keep them warm.
Mm.
And, after Meb's first marathon in New York, he's like, yeah, I'm not doing this again. And the next thing you know, a few years later, he actually wins an Olympic medal in the marathon, right?
Yeah.
You have to learn those lessons. And forever and a day, he's like, okay, you do not take your beanie off or your arm warmers, whatever it is that you need to stay warm during
Hmm.
certain components of marathons, including New York's marathon. Dathan, he learned the same thing, and he's just like, oh my gosh, I almost became, hypothermic. Best athletes in the world learn it, but they learn from their mistakes. And in
I see.
those scenarios, you have no means to adapt.
Hmm.
You've shed your clothing and you gave it away to the crowd. It's kind of like giving away your carbohydrate bottle too early on and someone, picking it up or whatever. You can't go back for it.
Yeah,
They don't
yeah.
carry gels. So, learn from your own, but then also from the errors of even the greatest athletes in the world. I mean, they talk about these things, about how they made the errors. Like when Desiree Linden was getting ready to break the world record in the 50K, we did
Hmm.
her session with Josh Cox. Josh Cox is known for the error he made when he went after the world record in the 50K. And he kind of gave a few tips like, don't do these things. This is a really bad idea, Desi,
Uh-huh.
and she took those tips on board and benefits from it. Connor Mance today is being mentored by Meb. And
Okay,
he's really taking on board all the lessons that Meb can teach him about the marathon. And
I
that's
see.
how we create success. We pass on our knowledge.
Yeah, yeah.
We learn by
That's
doing.
that's a great tip. Is there any other cognitive drills someone can do for the last 10K, Krista, other than what you touched on so far?
So you can always, force yourself to do cognitive drills as you're running, or you could also run your 20 miles, come back in if you want to, get on the bike, take your iPad and do cognitive training sessions on the app just to force your brain to do work, which is really what it's going to have to do on the day. We can take a look at something like that. I don't know for sure if it will work, but it is a different type of stressor cognitively that can teach you to push through. So that might be something that you do just to force the brain to work underneath an extended time period. You're like, I can't do more than 20 miles in training, but I can make my run finish at home, come back, get on the bike, and stay doing light cycling while I do cognitive drills that get harder and harder and force my brain to work.
Oh, wow, that's
You could try
fascinating.
it.
That's fascinating to hear that. Okay,
Yeah.
great. I'll give it a try, Krista, that you suggested. What else? Anything else
Yeah.
that you would recommend?
Yeah, I mean, you might even try increasing your duration of sleep as you go into a marathon. Let's say you're the person that only sleeps 7 hours a night.
Hmm.
Maybe you sleep 8 or 9 hours a night as you actually go into the marathon. Okay. That might be a strategy just to enhance overall recovery. They call it sleep banking to enhance cognitive performance. It can only work underneath certain circumstances, but it's something someone might try if they're hitting the wall or having challenges on the cognitive side with the marathon.
I see. I'm actually going to talk to, I don't know if you know her, Dr. Amy Bender, actually on the concept of sleep banking. I think next week I'm chatting with her, but I'm curious. Is sleep and the performance are definitely interconnected from your understanding? And for the cognitive drill, you're suggesting that definitely is one of the things that I should experiment with is increasing my sleep. Would it impact go longer being mentally alert? Is that kind of the direction you're recommending? Okay.
Right. Underneath the scenario of the marathon, that might work, but it also might not work. Unfortunately, the research in the area of sleep banking is not thorough enough, Kamal, for us to truly make any strong conclusions. All we can
I
do
see.
is to actually go out and experiment with it. The biggest
Hmm.
challenge is that it's done underneath very specific circumstances and without
Hmm.
appropriate controls. Like they use two groups of runners, and on top of that, they're ultra runners. Ultra runners expend energy differently than a
I see.
marathon runner.
I see.
And just because they do well on like a cognitive test that's tied to a computer doesn't
Hmm.
mean that they're going to do well once they're at the very point that you may hit the wall in ultra marathon running. Okay. They're not one and the same. Those cognitive skills do not match. One is what we call a far transfer cognitive test, which is like a psychomotor vigilance test or something of that nature. And then there's what's known as near transfer, okay, where the cognitive test reflects very specifically what you're going to experience, whether it's in the marathon or combat or sports shooting, what have you. Typically, we suggest you measure everything through near transfer so you can understand what is truly working. We
Hmm.
just don't have studies like that, and every circumstance is different. I actually got asked this by a group of police,
Okay.
and they said, is there anything to sleep banking? And I said, look, sleep banking is probably not what we have evidence for in your population. The police do shift work, and we
Right.
have not truly evaluated underneath the type of stressors they undergo the concept of sleep banking. And, I said, look, we just don't know if we have the evidence for it. What we have evidence for is for you to pay back your sleep debt, actually, that you incur as a function of your shift work. So that's where a lot of the research we draw on, if it's not specific enough, Kamal, to the circumstance, we can't
Right.
make inference really. We can
I
just
see.
tell people, look, we're going to try this with you. We're going to see if it works.
Yeah.
And is it really going to hurt you to sleep maybe 1 or 2 more hours leading, in the few nights prior to a marathon?
Hmm.
not really, unless you need to get up very early. Okay. In that instance, it's going to hurt you possibly because your circadian rhythm is then altered. When you sleep
Right.
bank, you alter your body's circadian rhythm. If you are then sleeping until, let's say, 6 or 7 in the morning in order
Yeah.
to sleep bank, and on
Yeah.
race day, you've got to be up at 5 a.m., doesn't work. You're actually then going to harm performance. Okay. So little things like that about sleep banking, we don't actually know.
So this is a topic that me and my wife, differ. So I am in this camp where I want to wake up on the similar time every day. Um, and my wife would be like, okay, I'll wake up early in the weekdays, but I'm banking on the weekends. So she'll wake up late on the weekends. We differentiate. I think she more follows the sleep banking concept than me. It's like, I don't care what time I sleep, but I'm waking up almost around the same time. I need to have my tea in the morning, same time and start get my brain going. But I don't know if there is a one camp versus the other, or both are equally data to prove that it's right. I don't know. I'm not done enough research, but I don't know. What is your take there?
Yeah. So the question is your wife paying back debt that she's incurred with sleep over the course of the week? So everyone is a little bit different.
Right.
In your case, if you're getting all your sleep that you're supposed to, 7+ hours a night, you don't really have any disruptions throughout the week, you feel good, you're sleeping good, you probably want to stay on that same time clock.
Hmm.
Whereas, let's say in your wife's case, she's getting up with the kids throughout the week. I don't know, maybe there's
Right.
something like that. Or she
Yeah.
stays working extra late. She goes to bed at 11 o'clock rather than the usual 9 o'clock or something like that. And she needs to recoup those couple of hours over the weekend.
Yeah.
That is called paying back sleep debt because she's only sleeping maybe 5 to 6 hours a night during the week. So she needs on the weekends to pay back that debt. Otherwise, if that's not what she's doing, we probably would tell her, look, if 7 to 8 hours is what you're sleeping every night, you're getting sufficient sleep for an adult. You don't want to extend that on the weekends because
Hmm.
you will alter your actual circadian rhythm. And the question is, does it hurt you when
Right.
you go back into the week? There's a lot of people where it can hurt them to
Yeah. Yeah.
sleep bank past what the body needs.
Yeah. What is the impact of breaking the circadian rhythm on the performance side of things? Like I'm running. I have a part view of this question, but I'm curious your take on if I'm breaking my circadian rhythm, what is the impact on my performance on race day?
Well, depends on where you're racing and the actual break in the circadian rhythm. Okay. So, like this past week, I actually flew from Colorado to South Carolina. Okay. South Carolina is 2 hours ahead of us. And because of how my flight was designed, I actually got in and went to bed at the same time I would typically go to bed in Colorado.
I
Okay.
see. I see.
So, in all reality, I didn't go anywhere and do anything where I truly broke my normative circadian rhythm. And I still made sure I slept long enough that it
Hmm.
matched the number of hours of sleep I typically get when I'm at home anyway. Okay, so I felt pretty good even though I switched time zones. If I was racing, I would have been fine because of the time of day I had to actually appear at. In this case, it was to give a presentation, but let's say it's for a race. I needed to be there at 8 a.m. for that presentation. Um, let's say you're going to race at 8 a.m. That's fine because I'm usually up by 5 or 6 in the morning.
Right.
I had the same actual timeline as I do when I'm back home.
I see.
Does that
I
make
see.
sense, Kamal? There was no
Yeah. Yeah.
detriment.
Right.
The
Right.
tougher part was coming around was coming back with delayed
Yeah.
flights, to be honest.
Yeah.
I had been up right, I've been up for an extra couple of hours in the
Right.
day, right, because I was on a different time zone, and then on top of that, the flight kept getting delayed so that instead of the normal 16 hours that I go in a day, I
Hmm.
ended up going for about I would say about 18 because of the,
Right.
flight delays.
Right.
That's when you got to come around and bank sleep. And the irony of it was I needed to get up the next morning and be somewhere at a certain point in time. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm just going to have to do this the next morning. Right. And so I actually slept in on Saturday to pay back the sleep debt I had acquired over
Okay.
a couple
Okay.
of days.
I see. I see.
Right. Whereas this
I
morning I didn't. I was back up at my normal routine.
Okay. Okay. So I think you use both strategies. So you are probably on the camp that, you are waking up on the same time frame, assuming that, you have the sleep, regular sleep that you plan to have. And if there's a debt that, you're doing the sleep banking concept. Okay.
Yeah. Yes. Remember, my circadian rhythm didn't change, right?
I was thinking of more of like, I'm considering running Sydney Marathon this early fall, late summer, like it's end of August. That's a 12-hour gap. So I'm thinking in terms of like, if I have to be there to get myself used to how many days is good enough? Is it a week? Do I need to be there more than a week? Because you need to plan it out, all this work and all. That's a question like, and how do you adjust your kind of sleep routine to make sure that you're ready on the race? Otherwise, you'd be like jet lag when you're running the race. And I don't know what can happen. Yeah.
Right. So this is what I would recommend to you. First and foremost, ensure you know when your race is going to start, race time, and then
Yeah.
work your way backwards so that you choose the right flight and how many days you need to shift your body in terms of the window that you're going to be operating in. Sometimes you can start that shift back home before ever getting on the plane.
That's a great
Other
idea.
times you can't.
Hmm.
Most elite athletes shift their circadian rhythm in advance and shorten the amount of time they're actually out of country when they go to do a race like that. They don't want to be away from home for too long or any longer than they need to, just because they won't have their normal food, their normal bed, factors of that nature that make them consistent.
Hmm.
And if you impact your consistency as you're going into a race for too long, you might actually, not do great. So let's look at the scenario that actually happened to Matt Emmons, a legend in sports shooting, when he went to the 2016 games. He is always as consistent as possible, has his routine, got to Brazil and could not sleep. And it was enough impairment in sleep that he, despite being number one in the world, couldn't compete well. You could see the same thing happening to a marathon runner, is that you may think you're doing yourself a favor by getting there early.
Right.
And in all reality, you can't sleep because it's a different bed. That's not a good thing, right? You thought you were going to
Yeah.
enhance performance by getting there and adapting to the time zone. And
Yeah.
instead, because you can't sleep in the bed that you have at the hotel or Airbnb, whatever it is, you actually do more harm.
That's
So
a very good.
that's something where intentionally you need to understand, maybe the pillows they have at the hotel,
Hmm.
the comfort of the bed you'll sleep in when you're in Sydney,
Right.
just factors like that as to how well or how well not you're going to travel.
Yeah.
Um, usually 3 days away from home, and most people start missing their bed. They start missing the
Yeah.
food that they're
Yeah.
accustomed to.
Right. That is so true.
So
That is so true. Now,
it
that's a very good point. That to train early, especially if there's a zone difference, right? All the big world marathon majors, a lot of international travelers, right? They're flying across time zones, and this is something to consider as they train for it, because it's a impact on them. And as you pointed out, getting early is probably may not be the best answer. And some people may adjust well. I can sleep anywhere. Some people may not, right? I'm in the camp where, no, I cannot sleep well in the hotels. I don't know what it is. But um, if it is the case, then you have to make sure that you have a plan B, which is, I think you're saying, how do you train ahead of time, as the example you gave, when you are locally in that space. Now, let's go to the last round where we're talking about the three areas that we touched on. How do you make it individualized? So these are the great frameworks that, what you give great examples of working it for elites. You gave some frameworks that can work for everyday runner. So if I'm to take that, let's take example of readiness. How do you make it individualized that I, as a John Doe, know, hey, I'm ready? What would be one or two or three key metrics that I can look for, Krista, for readiness point of view?
So when I'm talking to the everyday person, I think about the three core pillars they're going to have to support for the marathon, which is the physical, nutritional, and mental. Okay.
Sure. Yeah.
And the question is, how are they going to address each of those pillars for succeeding in the marathon? That's how they're going to individualize. Some people might turn around to the mental one and they might say, Krista, all I got to do is get good sleep, right? On the nutritional side, it may be that their stomach is so sensitive, all they can do is find the right gel or carbohydrate product for actual racing.
Hmm.
And that's it. That's all they're going to do. Okay. And physically, if they've got the right coach, the right training program for them, they know that they're going to be confident in that. So I try to look at those three pillars, the physical, nutritional, and mental side of the marathon, and ask people to individualize based off of that. Now, they might need to incorporate something like a social component, right? Because maybe the entire family travels with them to go to
Yeah.
the marathon, or they're doing the marathon as part of a family vacation, and their spouse and children are just giving them time to go do that particular marathon, right? While they're on
Right.
vacation. Then you've got to put a social component to it. But keep those as your three core and then add the other components as needed.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. Um, you recently focused on female athlete physiology and individualized assessments. And I think you refer to as the standard training plan may be a myth. Can you expand on what do you mean by that?
Hey, Kamal, you just cut out.
Can you hear me now?
Now I can hear you.
Okay, let me. I'll start there. So what I was referring to is you recently focused on the female athlete physiology and individualized assessments. The which refers to the standard training plan may be a myth. I was curious if you want to expand on why do you think a standard training plan may be a myth?
So you're breaking up again. I'm not sure if you can hear me.
I can hear you. Am I audible now?
You're cutting in and out. I have all the bars on my Wi-Fi, but you're cutting in and out.
Maybe me. All right, let me give it a try. How about now? Is it better now?
Yeah, better now.
Okay. Okay. Talking about one size fits all versus how can someone make it individualized. I was referring to that you think that the standard training plan that, sometimes maybe people can just go Google and get a training plan may be a myth. I was wondering if you want to share your take on why a standard training plan may be a myth.
Yeah. So just from the perspective of, standard training plan being a myth, when I've worked with people, what I've learned is that you have to incorporate a lot of what we call today flexible periodization that fits the actual human, the actual individual that you're working with.
Hmm.
And everyone has a plan that they're going to go out and execute on for the marathon, let's say.
Yeah.
But let's say life happens and you can't hit certain workouts. The question is, what are you going to do to help that person get to the line and get them as ready as possible? And that's where individualization actually comes in. And even then, if you take a look at female physiology, there are some women that have no symptomology during their menstrual cycle. They can
Hmm.
handle, standardized progressive loading. And then there's others where you actually have to accommodate the luteal phase and the menses, or one or the other. And so you restructure their training to accommodate that, Kamal. That's
I
not
see.
a standard plan. Most plans just have a progressive build.
Yeah.
And so we're always trying to find the best training methods to allow us to impose a training stimulus on people.
Hmm.
And when you take a look at some elite athletes and some of the actual training they do, like very specific training sessions for the marathon, you
Hmm.
can't just look at it as it's a 15-mile tempo. In all reality, if you break down the type of 15-mile tempo they have surges in their actual tempo. So let's say they average 450 a mile for a marathon runner that's a male at 7,700 feet of altitude. If they have put 3 miles in somewhere along there that are 430 or faster,
Hmm.
that's not your standard 15-mile tempo. Most people think of a 15-mile tempo as just running a certain pace for 15 miles, right?
Right, right.
You always have to be creating the variation in even a training session like that so that they have a new stimulus and that they can adapt.
Hmm.
The better trained they are, the less standardized it becomes. The more hectic their life, the less standardized the training program becomes. So to say that there's a standardized approach to imposing a training stimulus, I think is a little bit of a farce because I've never been able to do that with anyone if they're truly wanting individualized training. They're seeking
Makes
it
sense.
out for a reason. It's because a cookie cut program is not working for them.
Makes
There's
sense.
some really
Yeah.
great cookie cut programs out there on the market
Yeah.
that we can go buy. You can use rate of perceived effort to guide the training, and you will run a great marathon if you can just fit the square peg into a square peg. But if you take the square peg and you try to put it into a round hole with someone, it just doesn't work. Oftentimes, that's what's happening. And I'm like, why are people trying to put a square peg into a round hole all the time?
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
just it doesn't work. It happens all the time when I'm training tactical personnel. People give them a training plan, they think they're going to execute on that training plan and that they're going to get a certain outcome. It never works out that way. Never. And so you have to be prepared to modify and adapt it to what they need to actually help the tactical personnel meet their goals. So that's where your ability to do that on the athlete side, the marathon side, when you learn it there, you have to do it even better in a setting like that. Um, it's just how much variance can you throw in to meet the adaptation someone wants.
So why doesn't it work? I think you alluded to a very good factor. So you have a plan, you get to a person to execute a tactical plan, and you said most of the times it doesn't work. Is it because that plan was not made for that person A? Is that the main reason?
In the tactical population, I would just tell you it's a function of their schedule and the fact that you've got a roll workouts, you've got a lot of surprises that come up in their day, and you can't just anticipate that they're going to have a schedule like most people. So we're
I see.
always flipping things. Maybe we repeat weeks. Um, we find shorter ways to get a certain job done. Maybe they want to train for something that's a little longer, but all of a sudden their job changes and they're like, no, you got to go back to changing me for like a 2 mile event. So I had one of my tactical personnel say, oh, Krista, I want to train to run a mile in 5 minutes. He had huge changes in work. And all of a sudden he's like, okay, we're not going to be able to take the time to train for the 5 minute mile. I don't want to do that anymore. Train me to run 100K, but we're going to put it further out. Um, so they'll ask you to do things like that. And the question is, will we get to the line of the 100K, to be honest? Or do we need to adapt for something else that comes up with work?
That makes sense. Krista, I think to wrap up our individualization part, I have to ask you the role of technology for, because you have a data overload. You have a gadget for now every metric that you can measure, and it's overwhelming for a runner, John Doe or Jane Doe. How do you navigate this technology overload or information overload to actually figure out kind of the areas that you laid out, the three key areas that, okay, if you look at this technology, the data that is throwing at you, And how do you reduce the noise? I think what I was trying to get to.
Yeah. I think the challenge with technology is it keeps coming to people and saying, we're going to do this for you. We're going to do that. And it's defining things that are not really scientifically valid. All right. So when you're a coach or a sports scientist, you have to look at it and say, where does it belong for this individual, for this team? And what is the return on investment that it's going to give us? Most great coaches don't coach off of technology. Okay. Maybe we have tech. The question is, how are we going to use it? Or do we even use it to write training? Like, I don't use tech to write training. I've been writing it that long. So you come to me, I might use it just to keep track of how well the workout is going, to give me
Yeah.
some kind of insight in terms of your heart rate, maybe how you respond to a certain perception of effort, or how hard it is for you to run a certain pace, or how much of a training load we can actually achieve during this training block before you need a recovery week, so that I can design training better. And people are like, why do you design training this way, Krista? I'm like, oh, that's
Mhm.
years of experience. I learned off of certain profiles that they just can't tolerate, certain types of loading patterns. So I'll use it just to help me keep track better of how I provided loading to the athlete. But I'm really not training off of it. Either you know how to write the training as a coach for an individualized plan, or you don't. That's really
I
one of
see.
my key takeaways, is that
Mhm.
tech cannot tell you how to write a smarter training plan. Either you can write that training plan because you've coached enough, you have enough sets and reps under your belt that you can get the person to the line with a new training stimulus and create what you really need to create. Okay. The tech should only be there to give you the feedback that maybe you're looking for, and you need to know when to throw the tech out the door. Okay.
That is so true.
Some of these
Yeah.
tech measures, I mean, they're not even valid, but they're selling it to people. And then they're putting their faith into a tech measure that isn't really valid and scientifically based. It's not even like common sense based. It isn't even, valid from the coaching lab. Okay. As a coach, they might come in and go, what? What is this supposed to do? And I've seen that for years with coaches. We went through that period in the NBA when Catapult first came out. And the coaches were
Mhm.
just like, what are we supposed to do with this? We've never coached with it, but we've won NBA titles, you know? And so you're like, hey, let's see if we can find a place for this tech in your coaching and decide how you are going to utilize it. That's what I've seen with every great world-class coach, is that they might use a certain level of tech a certain way, but it doesn't mean that another coach is going to come along and use it that way. They'll have their own means. And the question is, how are they going to get the athlete there? They'll figure it out. But I've seen a lot of tech tossed to the side by coaches because it's not capable of being as artistic as the
Mhm.
coach is. It actually is too regimented
I see.
to provide any type of prescription on the training side. So the question is, how are you going to use it? What role does it play for you, either as a coach or as an athlete?
What would be an example of a metric that you would say that is not science backed, but technology pushes on, say, individual athletes?
So a metric that's out there that's not scientifically valid, it might be something like a readiness score from one of these sleep devices. Okay. None of those scores are valid. Okay.
Mhm.
And it's concerning to see it because they'll be like, hey, here's what my aura ring is telling me. And
Yeah.
aura is great for certain things. Like, it's great for a sleeping heart rate. It's great for tracking how long they've been in bed and maybe even the number of times they woke up at night, right?
Yeah.
But when it comes to understanding readiness, that they don't have the validity to demonstrate that it can truly measure that. And that can mess with someone's head. And they're like, oh my gosh, I'm not ready to do my workout today. Or the application of the metric is not appropriate. So let's take heart rate variability. Heart rate variability is not specific nor sensitive enough to tell us anything really. It just tells us an indicator of where the body is at. That's all it's doing. But people will try to guide training off of HRV. I'm like, don't do that. There's a lot of things that can influence it, whether it's what you ate. Like eating can suppress heart rate variability.
Wow.
How does that tell you whether or not you're ready to train?
So you refer to that messing up with your brain, and I used one of the sleeping tracking devices for some couple of months, and then it really kind of started to mess up on my head in a sense that the morning you wake up, you get the score that your recovery, and that's like I probably know if I had a good sleep or not without even that telling me. But when you give a number or with the color coded green, red, yellow, or kind of, and if it's red, I'm starting my day on the wrong foot, and I see a trickle impact on. Hey, I had this, X, Y, Z things I want to conquer that day. Now I messed up that. Oh, you didn't have a good sleep. Now you have to come up with a plan B. So I relate exactly what you mean by when you said that it can really mess up with your head. So thank you for calling it out. But I didn't realize that it is not validated by science. So thank you for sharing.
Yeah. With the sleep devices, I tell, hey, people, can look at these and get two things, hopefully. How long they're sleeping for and the resting heart rate. And the question is, what factors are influencing those two metrics? Okay. Maybe it's what you eat before bed. Maybe it's your sleep time routine. Maybe it's your ability to tolerate a certain training load. Maybe, it's how you handle, life stress, work stress while you're training at a certain level. Just the amount of hours you sleep and the heart rate while you're sleeping can tell you a lot. So that's where if you want to invest in your sleep device, use those two metrics and run them alongside, Kamal, your actual perception of sleep
I
and
see.
what might be altering your actual objective and subjective measures of sleep. Use them together, not apart.
No, that makes total sense. And probably that awareness is equally important, just having a device just to track sleep, and actually do something about being aware of that fact that I need to do the subjective part, what is influencing what, that kind of the pendulum to understanding. All right. Thank you, Krista. So let's move to our final round, the rapid fire round. I have a couple of questions, and whatever comes to your mind first, so you can answer. You don't have to, and you can expand as you feel as needed. What is the most underrated brain food for fueling your brain?
What is the most underrated brain food? I think it's protein. People don't understand how much protein can help prevent fatigue. It's a key part of fatigue management that I try to teach people. So I think it's the fact they don't know that protein is such a fatigue management tool, especially for the brain.
Thank you. I don't know, you didn't get a chance to talk about the nutrition guide that came up. I think the protein ranked higher than maybe the previous guideline that was there, which I think aligns with what you were just recommending.
Yeah, I
Next
mean, the
one.
thing about the new
Yeah.
dietary guidelines is,
No, go ahead.
yeah, so the thing about the new dietary guidelines is that a lot of it is it's just giving you more permission to increase your consumption of protein and to also let you know that it's okay to have some red meat and whole milk, right? They didn't say to go eat a whole bunch of it or
That's
for
true.
it to be a ketogenic diet.
Yeah,
They're just giving you more permission to increase the protein content of the diet and also to bring back in certain food groups. And if you design your nutrition correctly, I will just tell you, you don't have to worry about saturated fat. You can do it very well without increasing saturated fat intake if you choose the right protein sources.
That makes total sense. Thank you. Next one. One metric on a Garmin or Whoop or Aura that runners should actually care about.
I would say on an Oura Ring, it's the number of hours you're sleeping a night.
That's a good one. Thank you. Next one. What is the biggest lesson the military taught you about sport?
I think you can take some of the military concepts from an environment perspective and teach athletes to be more adaptable. I don't know that the military aspects really taught me anything for sport because the two have been so interchangeable for me. Like I used more of my sport background to be successful in the military environment rather than the other way around. But I will say this, probably the most influential thing I've taken from the military into sport is the time I spent with Marine Recon. We had a very, very good leader as the company commander, and I think he influenced me the most in terms of how you lead. That's what I would
I
tell
see.
you.
Oh, thank you. Next one, maybe a little tough one. If you could give a runner one tactical advantage that costs $0 and takes 5 minutes a day, what would it be?
Ensuring mobility. Mobility of your joints is huge with regards to being able to put force into the ground. Most runners do not do the mobility work, which takes 5 minutes a day, that they need to do. If you do 5 minutes a day of mobility work with a foam roller, a stretch rope, you're going to put that much force into the ground. And it is truly a great advantage.
So, Krista, thank you so much for sharing your background, your expertise. And I think we touched on all the four pillars that, or layers that you talked about. Where can people find about your work?
So you can always connect with me on my website, KristaAustin.com, or you can reach out via LinkedIn. Always happy to connect. And, definitely I've got blogs out there. I've got other podcasts, that regularly doing. So always just kind of Google search for that and you'll find out where I am and what I'm up to.
Great. It has been a pleasure, Krista, to chat with you and learn so much about personal. I benefited a lot learning different concepts and then you expanding on those concepts. So thank you so much for joining the pod.
Great to speak with you, Kamal. I really enjoyed it and I hope you have a great rest of your Sunday.
Thank you.